Picture this. You're holding your 3-month-old daughter, still figuring out the rhythm of midnight feedings and diaper changes, when you discover two life-shattering truths in the same moment. First, your husband of 5 years has been having an affair. Second, his girlfriend just got hired as your replacement at the job you've poured 6 years of your life into building. What would you do? Would you crumble? Would you fight? Or would you do what I did? Quietly, gather every piece of evidence you needed to reclaim not just your career, but your entire life. I'm Emma, and this is the story of how betrayal became the catalyst for the biggest transformation of my life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Emma Rodriguez, and 6 years ago I walked into Cascade Creative Solutions as a junior marketing coordinator, with a portfolio full of college projects and enough ambition to power the entire Pearl District. I was 26 then, fresh out of Portland State with a marketing degree, and absolutely convinced I was going to revolutionize advertising in the Pacific Northwest. Looking back, I probably seemed like every other eager graduate who thought they understood business because they'd aced a few case studies. But here's the thing about ambition. When it's backed by genuine curiosity and an unstoppable work ethic, it has a way of turning naive confidence into real competence. Cascade Creative Solutions wasn't the biggest agency in Portland, but it had something the larger firms lacked: soul. Tucked into a converted warehouse space in the Pearl District, with exposed brick walls covered in local art and windows that caught the morning light just right. It felt like the kind of place where creativity actually mattered. Michael Thompson, the CEO and founder, had started the company 8 years earlier, with a simple philosophy: help local businesses tell authentic stories that connect with their community. When I interviewed there, sitting across from Michael in his glass office while he sketched campaign ideas on a whiteboard, I knew I'd found my home. Those first months were a blur of learning curves and late nights. I absorbed everything like a sponge, from the technical aspects of campaign development to the subtle art of client relationship management. I learned that Portland's business community operated differently than the corporate environments I'd studied in textbooks. Relationships here were built over craft beer conversations at Deschutes brewery events and handshake agreements at Saturday farmers market. Trust wasn't earned through polished presentations alone. It came through showing up consistently, understanding the local culture, and proving you genuinely cared about the success of businesses that were often family-owned and deeply rooted in the community. Within my first year, I'd helped develop campaigns for 3 local restaurants that saw their weekend reservations double. I'd convinced a struggling vintage bookstore to partner with Powell's for a community reading series that brought them back from the brink of closure. I'd even managed to secure a small project with the Portland Trail Blazers community outreach team, which felt like landing a Fortune 500 client to someone with my level of experience. But more importantly, I'd started to understand something that would define my entire career. Marketing wasn't just about selling products, it was about building bridges between businesses and the communities they serve. By year 2, Michael promoted me to account manager, and I threw myself into the role with the kind of intensity that probably worried my friends but thrilled our clients. I developed a system for staying connected with every account that went far beyond quarterly check-ins and annual contract renewals. I remembered birthdays, business anniversaries, and the names of owners' children. I sent handwritten thank you notes after successful campaigns, and showed up to grand openings, even when I wasn't required to be there. When Pacific Eats, a local restaurant chain, was struggling with their brand identity during an expansion phase, I spent 3 weeks eating at every location, talking to managers and staff, understanding their culture from the inside out before proposing a campaign that captured their authentic neighborhood feel. The results spoke for themselves. Client retention rates improved dramatically during my tenure, and word-of-mouth referrals increased by 40%. But what I was most proud of was the way I'd started mentoring newer employees, sharing the relationship-building techniques I'd developed and helping them understand that successful marketing in Portland meant becoming part of the fabric of the business community rather than just another vendor selling services. By year 4, when Michael offered me the position of marketing director, I felt like I'd found my calling. The role came with real responsibility, overseeing a team of 12, managing our largest accounts, and having input on the strategic direction of the agency itself. I loved the challenge of balancing creative vision with practical business needs, and I especially loved the moment when a campaign we'd developed would launch, and suddenly you'd see our work integrated into the daily life of the city. There's something magical about walking through downtown Portland and seeing billboards, bus stops, and storefront displays featuring campaigns you've helped create. It was during this period that I met David. He was working as a financial analyst at a consulting firm downtown, and we met at a Portland Business Journal networking mixer at the Sentinel Hotel. He was charming in that quiet, steady way that complemented my more energetic personality. Where I was always buzzing with ideas and enthusiasm about the latest campaign, he was thoughtful and analytical, good at asking questions that helped me think through problems from different angles. Our relationship developed slowly and naturally over shared dinners at local restaurants and weekend hikes in the Columbia River Gorge. When we got married 3 years later, it felt like the perfect combination of personal happiness and professional success. David understood the demands of my career and seemed genuinely proud of what I'd accomplished at Cascade. He'd come to company events and client appreciation parties, charming everyone with his quiet intelligence and his ability to ask thoughtful questions about advertising campaigns, even though marketing wasn't his field. Michael loved him, often joking that I'd found the perfect partner who could balance my creative energy with practical financial sense. The next 2 years flew by in what felt like a perfect rhythm. My team at Cascade continued to grow and evolve, landing increasingly sophisticated accounts and developing campaigns that were getting noticed beyond Portland's business community. We'd started working with several tech startups that were part of the city's growing innovation scene, and I'd been featured in a Portland Business Journal article about young professionals who were helping shape the local marketing landscape. At home, David and I had settled into our house in Selwood, a neighborhood that perfectly captured our vision of Portland living. Tree-lined streets, walkable to coffee shops and restaurants, close enough to downtown for easy commutes, but quiet enough to feel like a real neighborhood. When I got pregnant with Sophia, it felt like the natural next step in a life that had been unfolding exactly as I dreamed it would. The pregnancy was planned and celebrated, and I approached it with the same methodical enthusiasm I brought to major campaign launches. I read every book, took every class, and prepared detailed transition plans for my maternity leave that would ensure my team and clients wouldn't miss a beat during my absence. Michael was incredibly supportive throughout the pregnancy, offering flexibility with my schedule and assuring me that my position would be waiting when I returned. We'd worked out a plan where Janet Williams, our senior account manager, would handle day-to-day operations while I was gone, with Michael stepping in for major strategic decisions. It felt secure and well-organized, exactly the kind of transition plan that allowed me to focus on preparing for motherhood without worrying about work. Sophia was born on a rainy March morning after 12 hours of labor that tested every ounce of strength and determination I thought I had. But holding her for the first time, looking into those impossibly alert dark eyes that seemed to take in everything around her with curious intensity, I understood immediately that every challenge of the previous months had been preparation for this moment. She was perfect in that overwhelming way that new parents talk about but can never quite capture in words. Tiny fingers that gripped mine with surprising strength, a soft tuft of dark hair that reminded me of David's, and an expression that seemed both ancient and brand new. The first few weeks of maternity leave passed in a haze of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and the steep learning curve that comes with caring for a newborn. David had taken 2 weeks off to help with the transition, and those early days felt like we were discovering parenthood together. He was gentle and patient with Sophia, getting up for middle-of-the-night diaper changes and learning to swaddle her with the precision he brought to financial spreadsheets. Friends and family visited with meals and gifts, and I felt surrounded by love and support. But as David returned to work and the initial rush of visitors settled into a quieter routine, I began to notice subtle changes in our relationship. He seemed distracted when he came home, often on his phone checking emails or taking calls that he said were work-related but required him to step outside or into another room. When I asked about his day, his answers became shorter and less detailed. I attributed it to the adjustment period that all new parents experience, the way a baby changes every dynamic in a household and requires everyone to find new rhythms. My own days had settled into a pattern revolving around Sophia's needs, feeding every 2 to 3 hours, naps that I tried to time with her sleep schedule, and the constant low-level vigilance that comes with caring for an infant. I loved being with her, marveling at the way she seemed to grow and change almost daily, but I also found myself missing the intellectual stimulation and social interaction of work. I'd check my email occasionally, staying loosely connected with Janet and my team, but I was careful not to cross boundaries during my leave. I trusted that everything at Cascade was running smoothly, and I looked forward to returning refreshed and ready to dive back into campaigns and client relationships. The discovery that would change everything happened on a Wednesday afternoon when Sophia was about 10 weeks old. I was paying bills online, a task that had become more complicated since becoming a parent, because it required finding those precious moments when Sophia was content and I could focus on a screen for more than a few minutes at a time. As I scrolled through our credit card statements, looking for the usual charges for groceries, gas, and baby supplies, several unfamiliar expenses caught my attention. There were restaurant charges at places David and I had never been to together, including an expensive dinner at Le Pigeon that happened on a night when he'd told me he was working late. There were charges for flowers from a local shop, purchased on a day when no flowers had arrived at our house. Most puzzling was a charge for a hotel room at the Heathman in downtown Portland, booked for a weekend when David had claimed to be at a work conference in Seattle. My first instinct was confusion rather than suspicion. I wondered if his credit card number had been stolen or if there was some mistake with the billing, but as I looked more carefully at the dates and amounts, a pattern began to emerge that made my stomach clench with a growing sense of dread. The charges weren't random. They clustered around dates when David had been particularly distant or had offered explanations for late nights and weekend work commitments that hadn't quite added up. I sat there in our quiet living room, Sophia sleeping peacefully and her bouncer beside me, and felt the foundation of my life shift in a way that was both subtle and seismic. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I also couldn't ignore what seemed like mounting evidence that David was being dishonest about something significant. The financial analyst in him would never make careless mistakes with credit card charges, and the husband I thought I knew would never book a hotel room without telling me. My hands were shaking as I opened a new browser window and did something I'd never imagined I'd need to do. I started investigating my own husband. I checked social media accounts, looking for photos or check-ins that might explain the mysterious charge. I searched through his email, feeling terrible for violating his privacy, but driven by a need to understand what was happening to our marriage. What I found was worse than mysterious credit card charge. There were emails and text message screenshots that made it clear David had been having an affair for the past 2 months, starting shortly after Sophia was born. The woman's name was Ashley Chen, and based on their correspondence, their relationship had moved quickly from professional acquaintance to something much more intimate and serious, but the detail that made everything infinitely more complicated was buried in one of their more recent conversations. Ashley had mentioned her new job at a marketing firm, and preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Pearl District, expressing excitement about finally getting the opportunity to lead campaigns and build client relationships. As I read her description of the company, exposed brick walls, creative energy, focus on local businesses, I realized with growing horror that she was talking about Cascade Creative Solutions. Ashley Chen, my husband's girlfriend, had somehow gotten hired at my company while I was on maternity leave. The room seemed to spin as I processed the implications. This wasn't just personal betrayal, it was professional sabotage. David knew everything about my work, my clients, my methods, and my relationships at Cascade. He'd been to company events, met my colleagues, heard my stories about campaigns and challenge. If he'd been sharing that information with Ashley, she would have had unprecedented insight into my job and how to position herself as my replacement. I called Janet immediately, my voice probably betraying more urgency than I intended. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear the familiar background noise of the office phones ringing, muffled conversations, the hum of creative energy that I'd been missing during my leave. "Emma," she said warmly, "how are you? How's little Sophia?" "She's wonderful," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Janet, I need to ask you something, and it might sound strange. Has anyone new been hired recently? Any temporary staff to help with my accounts while I'm out?" There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. "Actually, yeah. Michael brought someone on about 2 weeks ago, Ashley Chen. She came highly recommended, and said she had experience with our type of client base. Michael thought it would be good to have extra support since you're out, and we've been busier than expected." What's she like? I asked, trying to sound casual while my heart pounded. Honestly, she's been a little intense, very confident. Lots of ideas about how to improve our processes. She's been asking a lot of questions about your accounts specifically, wanting to understand your approach with clients. Michael seems impressed with her initiative, but some of us are finding her a bit overwhelming. I closed my eyes, feeling pieces of a terrible puzzle clicking into place. Janet, I need you to do me a favor, but I need you to be discreet about it. Can you send me Ashley's resume and any background information you have about her? And can you tell me exactly which account she's been working on? Another pause. Emma, is everything okay? You sound stressed. I'm fine. I just want to make sure everything's running smoothly while I'm out. You know how I am about staying connected with the work. Of course, I'll send you what I can. But Emma, you're supposed to be focusing on Sophia and recovering. Don't worry too much about what's happening here. We've got things handled. After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone, torn between wanting to protect Janet from getting involved in what was clearly becoming a complicated situation, and desperately needing information about what was happening at my company. Within an hour, she'd sent me Ashley's resume and a summary of the accounts she'd been assigned. Reading through Ashley's qualifications, I felt a mix of anger and amazement at the level of deception involved. Her resume listed 5 years of marketing experience, including work with major clients and successful campaign development, but several details seemed suspiciously vague, and when I checked the references she'd provided, half of them led to phone numbers that were no longer in service. More troubling was the list of accounts she'd been assigned. These weren't random projects or smaller clients. They were my most important relationships: Powell's Books, Deschutes Brewery, Pacific Eats, and even the Portland Trailblazers community outreach work. These were accounts I'd built over years of careful relationship management, clients who trusted me personally, and had specifically requested to work with me on ongoing projects. That evening, when David came home from work, I watched him different. He kissed me hello, and asked about my day with the same routine warmth he'd shown for months, but now I could see the performance in it. When he played with Sophia, making her giggle with funny faces and gentle tickling, I wondered how he could compartmentalize his life so completely that he could be a loving father in our living room while conducting an affair that threatened everything we'd built together. I didn't confront him that night. I needed time to think, to plan, and to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. This wasn't just a marriage crisis, it was a coordinated attack on my professional life that required careful strategy to address. As I lay awake that night, listening to David's steady breathing beside me and Sophia's soft sounds from her crib across the room, I began to formulate a plan. Ashley Chen thought she could walk into my life, steal my husband, and take over my career while I was vulnerable and distracted by new motherhood. She had no idea that she'd just declared war on someone who'd spent 6 years learning how to fight for every client, every campaign, and every relationship that mattered. And David, who'd shared intimate details about my work and my methods with someone who was actively trying to replace me, was about to learn that betraying your wife's trust is one thing, but sabotaging her career is something else entirely. I was going to reclaim everything that was mine, starting with my job, and ending with my life, and I was going to do it in a way that would ensure neither Ashley nor David would ever underestimate me again. The next morning brought an unexpected text message that would confirm my worst fears about how deep this betrayal ran. David had left for work early, claiming he had an important client presentation, and I was settling into my morning routine with Sophia when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown Portland number. "Hi Emma, this is Ashley Chen, from Cascade Creative. I know you're on maternity leave, but I wanted to introduce myself since I'm helping cover some of your accounts while you're out. I'd love to chat sometime about your approach with the Powell's campaign. I have some fresh ideas that might take it to the next level. Hope you and baby are doing well." I stared at the message, reading it 3 times before the full audacity of it sank in. Ashley Chen, the woman who was sleeping with my husband, had just texted me under the pretense of professional courtesy while simultaneously undermining my work. The casual mention of fresh ideas for the Powell's campaign felt like a deliberate provocation, as if she was testing whether I knew about her relationship with David, or was genuinely unaware of the larger situation. My first instinct was to respond immediately, to let her know exactly what I knew and how inappropriate her contact was. But something stopped me, a strategic voice in my head that reminded me of all the client negotiations where patience and information gathering had served me better than emotional reaction. Instead, I screenshot the message and began documenting what would become a comprehensive record of everything Ashley did during my absence. I spent the rest of that morning researching Ashley Chen more thoroughly than I'd ever researched a competitor. Her LinkedIn profile painted the picture of an ambitious marketing professional with experience at agencies in Seattle and San Francisco, but when I dug deeper into the companies she'd listed, several red flags emerged. One of the agencies she claimed to have worked for had closed 2 years before her supposed employment there. Another had no record of her in their online team directory during the time frame she'd specified. Her portfolio, which was publicly available through her personal website, featured campaigns that looked impressive at first glance but fell apart under closer scrutiny. Several of the successful projects she'd highlighted appeared to be stock photography and template designs with fictional client names attached. The writing samples showed a surface-level understanding of marketing principles but lacked the depth of insight that comes from actually managing client relationships and seeing campaigns through from conception to execution. What struck me most was how carefully she'd crafted her professional image to appeal specifically to Michael's interest. Her bio emphasized her passion for supporting local businesses and building authentic community connections, using language that echoed the mission statement of Cascade Creative almost word for word. She'd clearly done her homework about our company culture, and I realized with growing certainty that David had been her primary source of information. That afternoon, I called my friend Maria Santos, who worked in HR at a larger agency downtown. We'd met through Portland's Women in Marketing networking group, and had maintained a friendship built on shared experiences, navigating the challenges of building careers in a still male-dominated industry. I trusted her judgment, and knew she'd give me honest advice about the situation I was facing. "Maria, I need your opinion on something, and I need you to keep this confidential," I began after we'd caught up on basic pleasantries about Sophia and her own work projects. "Of course, what's going on?" I gave her a carefully edited version of the situation, focusing on the professional aspects and leaving out the personal details about David's affair. I told her that someone had been hired at my company while I was on leave, claiming qualifications that seemed questionable, and that I was concerned about how this person might be representing Cascade to my clients. "Send me her resume and portfolio," Maria said immediately. "I know people at most of the agencies in the Pacific Northwest. If she's been embellishing her experience, I can probably verify it within a few hours." By evening, Maria had confirmed what I'd suspected. 3 of the companies on Ashley's resume had no record of employing her, and the one reference who did return Maria's call described Ashley as enthusiastic but inexperienced, and mentioned that she'd left her position after only 4 months due to creative differences with senior staff. "Emma, this woman is essentially running a con," Maria told me during our follow-up call. "She's created an entirely fictional professional background. How did she even get hired without proper reference check?" That question haunted me, as I tried to piece together how Ashley had managed to talk her way into my job. Cascade Creative had always been thorough about hiring, partly because Michael valued cultural fit as much as technical qualification. The fact that Ashley had been brought on so quickly without the usual deliberative process I'd observed in previous hires suggested that something unusual had influenced the decision. The next day brought another clue when Janet called me unexpectedly during Sophia's afternoon nap. Her voice carried a tension I'd rarely heard from her in all our years working together. "Emma, I'm calling from my car because I didn't want to have this conversation in the office. Something strange is happening with Ashley, and I think you need to know about it." "What kind of strange?" "She's been asking very specific questions about your client relationships. Not just general strategy stuff, but personal detail. She wanted to know about your history with the Powell's account manager, your communication style with the Deschutes team, even things like which restaurants you take clients to for lunch meeting." When I asked why she needed such detailed information, she said Michael had asked her to conduct a comprehensive review of our client management approaches. I felt my stomach tighten. "Did you give her that information?" "Some of it, before I started feeling uncomfortable about how specific her questions were. But Emma, that's not the weirdest part. Yesterday I saw her in Michael's office going through physical files. Your file." When I asked what she was looking for, she said she was familiarizing herself with documentation standards,
but she was specifically reviewing your client correspondence and campaign. Janet, this is important. Has Michael said anything to you about making permanent changes to account management while I'm out? Has there been any discussion about restructuring my role when I come back? There was a long pause. Not directly to me, but I overheard a conversation between Michael and Ashley where she was talking about opportunities for improvement in how we handle our major accounts. She seemed to be suggesting that some clients might benefit from a fresh perspective and updated approaches to digital engagement. After hanging up with Janet, I sat in my quiet house, feeling a rage that was unlike anything I'd experienced before. This wasn't just about David's infidelity anymore, though that betrayal still cut deep. This was about someone systematically attempting to dismantle the professional life I'd spent 6 years building, using inside information provided by my own husband to position herself as my replacement. I realized that Ashley's plan was more sophisticated than simple opportunism. She wasn't just hoping to take over some of my responsibilities during my leave. She was actively working to convince Michael that she could do my job better than I could. The questions about my client relationships, the review of my files, the suggestions about fresh perspectives, it all pointed to a coordinated effort to undermine my standing with the company's leadership while I was unable to defend myself. That evening, I made a decision that would define everything that followed. I wasn't going to wait for my scheduled return from maternity leave to address this situation. I wasn't going to trust that Michael would see through Ashley's deception on his own, and I certainly wasn't going to let David continue providing insider information that could be used against me professionally. I began by documenting everything I'd discovered about Ashley's false credentials, creating a comprehensive file that included screenshots of her fabricated resume, notes from Maria's verification calls, and a timeline of her suspicious behavior at Cascade. I also started recording my conversations with Janet and other colleagues, building a clear picture of how Ashley was operating within the company and what information she was gathering about my work. But documentation alone wouldn't be enough. I needed to understand exactly what Ashley had been telling Michael and how successfully she'd been positioning herself as my permanent replacement. More importantly, I needed to assess whether any of my clients had been contacted directly and what changes, if any, had been made to ongoing campaigns without my knowledge. The full scope of what I was facing became clear 3 days later when I received a call that shattered any remaining illusions about the professional boundaries Ashley was willing to cross. Rachel Morrison, the marketing coordinator at Powell's Books and one of my closest client contacts, called me directly on my personal phone rather than going through the office. "Emma, I hope it's okay that I'm calling you at home. I got your number from that card you gave me last year when we were working on the holiday campaign. I need to ask you about something, and I wasn't sure who else to contact."
Of course. Rachel, what's going on? We had a meeting yesterday with someone from your office, Ashley Chen. She introduced herself as the new account lead for Powell's and said she'd be our primary contact going forward. She presented what she called an evolved strategy for our spring campaign that was completely different from everything we'd discussed before you went on leave. My blood went cold. What kind of different strategy? Well, for starters, she wants to completely rebrand our community events program. You know how we've built our identity around being the neighborhood bookstore even though we're obviously much bigger than that. She's proposing we position ourselves as a premium literary destination and focus our marketing on attracting tourists and out-of-state visitors, rather than maintaining our local community connections. I closed my eyes, feeling physically sick. The community focus of Powell's marketing wasn't just a strategy I'd developed, it was core to their brand identity and the reason they'd remained successful while other independent bookstores struggled against online competition. Ashley was proposing to destroy the very foundation of what made Powell's special in the Portland market. Rachel, did she explain why she thought this change was necessary? She said the previous approach had been limited by small-town thinking, and that Powell's had the potential to become a nationally recognized brand if we were willing to think bigger. When I mentioned that our local community events and neighborhood partnerships were actually our strongest revenue drivers, she said those numbers reflected outdated metrics and that we should be focusing on scalable growth strategy. I could hear the frustration in Rachel's voice, and I knew exactly how she must have felt listening to someone dismiss years of successful work with corporate buzzwords and condescending analysis. Powell's had chosen to work with Cascade precisely because, We understood their unique position in the market and had never tried to force them into generic marketing templates. Emma, I'm going to be completely honest with you. We were really uncomfortable with her presentation. It felt like she didn't understand our business or our values at all. We specifically asked to continue working with you when you return from leave, and she said that might not be possible because you'd be transitioning to different responsibilities within the agency. She said, "Well, I could barely keep my voice level. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but she strongly implied that when you come back, you'll be moving to a more junior role focused on smaller accounts." She made it sound like the decision had already been made and that we should get comfortable working with her as our permanent contact. After I hung up with Rachel, I had to put Sophia in her crib and step outside to our back porch to process what I'd just learned. Ashley wasn't just positioning herself to take over my job. She was actively telling clients that I'd been demoted and that they needed to accept her as my replacement. She was presenting completely unauthorized changes to established campaigns and representing these changes as official Cascade policy. The level of professional misconduct was staggering, but what made it even worse was realizing that she'd clearly gotten approval from Michael to present herself as the account lead. You don't walk into a client meeting claiming to be the new primary contact unless someone in leadership has authorized that representation. I called Janet again, this time with specific questions about what authority Ashley had been given and whether Michael was aware of the changes she was proposing to client campaigns. "Janet, I just heard from Rachel at Powell's about a meeting Ashley had with them yesterday. Can you tell me what you know about that?" "Oh no," Janet said immediately. "Emma, I was hoping you wouldn't find out about that until we could figure out how to handle it internally. Ashley scheduled that meeting without discussing it with anyone on the account team. She told Michael it was just a check-in to maintain client relationships while you were out. But she presented herself as the new account lead and proposed major changes to their spring campaign." "She did what, Emma? We had no idea she was going to do anything beyond a basic status update." "Michael specifically told her to let clients know that you'd be returning and that any major strategic decisions should wait until you're back." "Then why is she telling Powell's that I'm being moved to a junior role when I return?" There was a long silence. "Emma, I think you need to talk to Michael directly. Something's not right here and I'm starting to worry that Ashley isn't being completely honest with any of us about what she's been authorized to do." That conversation confirmed what I'd been suspecting. Ashley was operating with far more autonomy than anyone had intended to give her, and she was using that freedom to actively sabotage my client relationships while positioning herself as my permanent replacement. She'd found a way to gain Michael's initial trust and was now exploiting that trust to advance her own agenda without oversight. I spent the rest of that day in a state of controlled fury, pacing around my house while Sophia napped and trying to develop a plan that would address the immediate threat to my career without jeopardizing my legal protections under maternity leave. I knew that confronting Ashley directly would likely escalate the situation and potentially alert her to how much I knew about her background and activities. But I also couldn't sit passively while she systematically destroyed relationships I'd spent years building. That evening, when David came home from work, I watched him with new awareness of how much information he'd been sharing about my professional life. He asked his usual questions about my day and Sophia's routine, but I found myself analyzing every interaction for signs of the deception I now knew he was capable of maintaining. "How are things at Cascade?" he asked casually while we were preparing dinner. "Are you staying in touch with your team while you're out?" "Some," I replied carefully. "Janet calls occasionally to update me on how things are going." "That's good. I'm sure they miss having you around. Any interesting developments with your account?" The question felt loaded in a way it never had before. Was he fishing for information to share with Ashley, or was this just normal spousal conversation? I decided to test his knowledge. "Actually, there's been some changes with the Powell's account. Someone new is handling their spring camp." I watched his face carefully, looking for any sign that this wasn't news to him. He nodded thoughtfully and said, "Well, I'm sure whoever's covering for you will do their best to maintain the relationships you've built." His response seemed genuine, but I realized that David had become skilled enough at deception that I could no longer trust my ability to read his reaction. The man I'd been married to for 5 years had been living a double life for months without me detecting it until I'd found concrete evidence. I couldn't rely on intuition anymore when it came to determining what he did or didn't know about Ashley's activity. Later that night, after David had fallen asleep, I made a decision that felt both necessary and heartbreaking. I was going to have to proceed with addressing the situation at Cascade without confiding in my husband, because I could no longer trust that anything I told him wouldn't find its way back to the woman who was trying to destroy my career. The next morning brought a revelation that would fundamentally change how I approached the entire situation. While Sophia was having her morning feeding, I decided to review my email more systematically than I had since going on leave. I'd been checking sporadically for important messages, but I hadn't done a comprehensive review of my work correspondence in weeks. What I discovered buried in my inbox was a thread of emails that made me realize the extent of the power I actually held in this situation. Over the past 2 months, I'd received at least 15 direct messages from clients, vendors, and industry contacts who were trying to reach me for various reasons. Some were routine check-ins, but others revealed information that Ashley and Michael clearly didn't know I possessed. The most significant was an email from Tom Chen, no relation to Ashley, who was the regional sales director for a major advertising platform that Cascade used for several client campaigns. Tom had reached out to let me know about a pricing restructure that would affect our accounts, starting in April, just before my scheduled return from leave. More importantly, he'd mentioned that he'd been trying to discuss this change with someone at Cascade but had been getting confusing responses from our team. "Emma, I've been working with Cascade for 3 years and you've always been my main point of contact for contract negotiations and pricing discussions. I tried reaching out through your main office number, and someone named Ashley Chen returned my call. She seemed unfamiliar with our existing agreements and asked me to send her all of our contract documentation so she could review our partnership from the ground up. When I explained that we just needed to update pricing on existing services, she insisted that this was an opportunity to optimize our vendor relationships and suggested we schedule a meeting to discuss alternative solutions." Tom's email went on to express confusion about whether Cascade was satisfied with their current vendor relationships and concern about potential disruptions to ongoing campaigns. He'd specifically asked to speak with me directly because he trusted our established working relationship and didn't want to make changes that might negatively impact my clients. This email was a goldmine of information. It revealed that Ashley was overstepping her authority with vendors, potentially jeopardizing existing contracts, and creating confusion in the industry about Cascade's stability and leadership. More importantly, it showed me that my professional network was actively trying to maintain relationships with me personally, even during my absence. I continued reading through my accumulated emails and found similar messages from other vendors, 2 freelance designers we worked with regularly, and even a potential client who had been referred to me specifically and was waiting for my return to discuss a new project. The picture that emerged was of a professional network that remained loyal to me personally and was actively resistant to working with my supposed replacement. But the email that truly revealed the scope of my hidden power was from David Kim, the community outreach coordinator for the Portland Trail Blazers. David had become a valuable contact over the past 2 years, and we'd developed several successful partnership campaigns between the team and local businesses. His email was marked as urgent and had been sent just 3 days earlier. "Emma, I hope you and your family are doing well. I'm reaching out because we have a situation that requires your specific expertise and relationships in the Portland business community. We're planning a major community initiative for next season that would involve partnerships with at least 12 local businesses, and the team leadership has specifically requested that you lead the campaign development. The project budget is significantly larger than anything we've worked on before, approximately $150,000 for the initial phase, and we'd like to discuss the possibilities with you directly. I know you're on maternity leave, but we're hoping to schedule a preliminary conversation when you're available. This project could be a game changer for Cascade if we can put together the right partnerships." I stared at that email for a long time, understanding immediately what it represented. This wasn't just a new business opportunity, it was the kind of high-profile, high-budget project that could define an agency's reputation in the Portland market. The Trailblazers community outreach initiatives got significant media coverage and public attention. Being selected to lead a campaign of this scope would be a major career milestone, and would significantly increase Cascade's profile with other potential clients. More importantly, David Kim had specifically requested me, not Cascade Creative in general. The project was tied to my personal relationships and reputation in the local business community. Ashley could present herself as my replacement, all she wanted, but she couldn't replicate the trust and connections I'd built over 6 years of consistent work. I realized that this email represented leverage I hadn't known I possessed. Michael had no idea this opportunity existed, and Ashley certainly couldn't claim credit for a relationship she'd never built. If I handled this correctly, the Trailblazers project could be my ticket back to Cascade with enhanced authority and recognition. But first, I needed to understand exactly what Ashley had been doing with my other client relationships, and whether any permanent damage had been done to campaigns that were already in progress. I spent the rest of that morning making a series of strategic phone calls to key contacts, framing each conversation as a routine check-in while gathering intelligence about Ashley's activities. The picture that emerged was both alarming and encouraging. Ashley had indeed been presenting herself as the new account lead to several clients, but her reception had been mixed at best. The Pacific Eats restaurant chain had requested clarification about why their account management was changing, and when Ashley couldn't provide a satisfactory explanation, they'd asked to delay any strategic decisions until my return. Deschutes Brewery had been even more direct, telling Ashley that they preferred to continue working with me, and requesting that she limit her involvement to administrative support rather than strategic development. The common thread in these conversations was that clients were resistant to the changes Ashley was proposing, and skeptical of her ability to understand their specific needs and market position. Several mentioned that her communication style felt corporate and impersonal compared to the relationship-based approach they'd come to expect from Cascade. Most encouraging was a conversation with Sarah Mitchell, the owner of Pacific Eats, who had always been one of my most collaborative and supportive clients. Sarah was refreshingly direct about her concerns. "Emma, I'm so glad you called. We've been wondering what's really going on with your agency. This Ashley person seems nice enough, but she doesn't seem to understand our business model at all. She keeps pushing us towards social media campaigns that feel completely wrong for our brand identity." When we tried to explain that our customers value authenticity and community connection over trendy marketing tactics, she said we were limiting our growth potential. Honestly, we're starting to wonder if Cascade is moving in a direction that's not aligned with our value. This conversation crystallized something important. Ashley's approach wasn't just different from mine, it was fundamentally incompatible with the clients I'd cultivated and the market positioning that had made Cascade successful. She was trying to impose generic marketing strategies on businesses that had specifically chosen us because we understood their unique positions in the Portland market. That afternoon, I made a decision that would prove crucial to everything that followed. Instead of waiting for my scheduled return to address the situation, I was going to accelerate my timeline and take control of the narrative before Ashley could do any more damage to my client relationships or position herself as my permanent replacement. I started by drafting a carefully worded email to David Kim about the Trailblazers opportunity, expressing enthusiasm for the project and proposing a preliminary meeting that could take place during my final week of maternity leave. I positioned this as a strategic advantage for Cascade, emphasizing that early discussions would allow us to develop a stronger proposal than if we waited until the official return date. Then I began reaching out to my closest client contacts, not to circumvent Ashley's role but to reassure them about continuity and gather more specific information about what changes she'd been proposing. I framed these conversations as brief check-ins from someone who cared deeply about maintaining the quality of service they'd come to expect. By the end of that day, I had accumulated enough information to understand exactly what I was dealing with and what advantages I still held despite Ashley's attempts to undermine my position. She might have convinced Michael to give her significant autonomy, and she might have David feeding her inside information about my work methods, but she couldn't replicate the relationships and trust I'd built through years of consistent, authentic engagement with Portland's business community. More importantly, I now knew about opportunities and client concerns that neither Ashley nor Michael were aware of. The Trailblazers project alone could change the dynamics of my return
and demonstrate value that couldn't be replaced by someone with fabricated credentials and second-hand knowledge. The unraveling of Ashley's carefully constructed facade began with a single phone call that she probably never expected would happen. It was a Tuesday morning, 11 weeks into my maternity leave, and I was settling into what had become my routine of morning research, while Sophia slept peacefully in her swing. My phone rang with a call from Maria Santos, the HR professional who had helped me verify Ashley's credentials. "Emma, you need to know about something that happened yesterday." I was at the Portland Marketing Association lunch, and Michael Thompson was there. We were making small talk about industry changes, and he mentioned how excited he was about a new hire who was bringing fresh energy to Cascade. When I asked who he was referring to, he said Ashley Chen, and started talking about her impressive background with agencies in Seattle and San Francisco. My stomach clenched. "What did you tell him?" "I kept it general, but Emma, I think he needs to know what we discovered about her resume." The way he was talking, it's clear she's made a significant impression on him, and he's considering giving her even more responsibility. He mentioned something about expanded roles and strategic leadership opportunities. Did he say anything specific about my position when I returned? There was a pause that told me everything I needed to know before Maria even answered. He said Cascade was evolving its client service model and that when you return, you might be transitioning to focus on your strengths in relationship maintenance, while newer team members handle strategic development. "Emma, it sounded like he's planning to restructure your role significantly." After hanging up with Maria, I sat in my quiet living room trying to process what I'd just learned. Ashley hadn't just been positioning herself as my temporary replacement, she'd convinced Michael that she was better suited for the strategic aspects of my job than I was. The woman with fabricated credentials and no real understanding of our clients was being considered for permanent promotion while I was being relegated to what sounded like a supportive role. This conversation triggered a realization that changed my entire approach to the situation. I'd been thinking defensively, trying to protect my existing position and relationship. But what I really needed to do was go on the offensive, demonstrating value that Ashley couldn't match, and exposing the weaknesses in her approach, before Michael made any irreversible decisions about restructuring. I started by reaching out to Tom Chen, the vendor who had expressed confusion about Ashley's handling of contract negotiations. Instead of waiting for him to navigate the situation on his own, I offered to clarify the pricing updates and ensure continuity with existing agreements. "Tom, I apologize for any confusion you've experienced with our team while I've been on leave. I understand Ashley has been asking for documentation reviews, but I want to assure you that we're very satisfied with our current vendor relationship. Can you send me the pricing update information directly? I'd like to review it and provide feedback before any changes are implemented." Tom's relief was immediately apparent. "Emma, I'm so glad to hear from you directly. I've been worried about making changes without understanding the full context of your existing campaigns." Ashley seems enthusiastic, but she doesn't have the background knowledge to understand why we structured our agreements the way we did. This conversation led to something I hadn't expected. Tom volunteered information about other vendors who had similar concerns about Ashley's approach to established relationships. Apparently, she'd been contacting multiple service providers, questioning existing agreements, and suggesting that Cascade might be interested in exploring alternatives. Her approach was creating anxiety throughout our vendor network about the stability of long-term partnerships. "Emma, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but several of us have been talking about the situation. We've all worked with you for years and built our service models around the specific needs of your client. Ashley seems to think everything should be renegotiated based on generic industry standards rather than the customized approaches that have been working successfully." This was exactly the kind of information I need. Ashley wasn't just failing to maintain my client relationships, she was actively disrupting the vendor partnerships that supported our entire operation. Michael had no idea that his impressive new hire was creating instability throughout Cascade's professional network. That afternoon, I received another call that confirmed my growing understanding of how Ashley's inexperience was beginning to show. Janet called me from her car again, and this time her voice carried a note of genuine concern. "Emma, we had an incident today that I think you need to know about." Ashley was leading a strategy meeting for the Deschutes Brewery campaign, and she presented ideas that were completely inappropriate for their brand identity. She suggested we develop social media content focused on lifestyle aspirations and premium positioning, basically trying to make Deschutes look like some kind of luxury brand instead of the accessible community-focused brewery they actually are. How did the Deschutes team respond? They were polite during the meeting, but afterward, Mark Johnson asked to speak with me privately. He said the presentation felt like Ashley didn't understand their business at all, and he specifically asked when you'd be returning because he wanted to get the campaign back on track with someone who understood their market position. This was the third client in 2 days who had expressed dissatisfaction with Ashley's strategic approach. The pattern was becoming clear. She was applying generic marketing formulas without understanding the specific cultural dynamics that made each client successful in the Portland market. Janet, has Michael been in these client meetings? Does he know how clients are responding to Ashley's proposals? That's the thing, Emma. Michael has been traveling a lot recently, meeting with potential new clients in Seattle and Vancouver. He's been trusting Ashley to handle the day-to-day client management, and she's been giving him very positive reports about how everything is going. I don't think he knows about the concerns clients have been expressing. This information was crucial. Michael was making decisions about Ashley's capabilities based on her own reporting rather than direct observation or client feedback. She was essentially managing up while mismanaging the actual client relationships, creating a disconnect between perception and reality that could have serious consequences for Cascade's reputation. That evening, I made a strategic decision that would prove pivotal in everything that followed. Instead of continuing to gather information passively, I was going to start documenting everything systematically and preparing for a conversation with Michael that would happen sooner rather than later. I created a comprehensive file that included Ashley's falsified credentials, client feedback about her inappropriate strategic recommendations, vendor concerns about her disruptive approach to established partnerships, and timeline of her unauthorized representations to clients. More importantly, I documented the opportunities that were available to Cascade, like the Trailblazers project, that required my specific relationships and expertise. But the most significant development came the next day, when I received a call that would change the entire dynamic of the situation. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Sophia's pediatrician, had been asking about my plans for returning to work during our routine appointment. When I mentioned that I was considering returning a week earlier than originally planned to address some pressing projects, she encouraged me to trust my instincts about what felt right for my family. Emma, you seem ready to re-engage with work, and Sophia's thriving. If you feel like you need to address some professional situations, there's no medical reason you couldn't return earlier than your original date. Many women find that having some control over their transition back to work actually reduces stress rather than increasing it. This conversation gave me permission to do what I'd been wanting to do for days, take back control of my professional life before Ashley could do any more damage. I was going to return from maternity leave early, but I wasn't going to announce my return until I'd had a chance to assess the situation firsthand and prepare for the conversations that would determine my future at Cascade. The warning signs were multiplying daily. Ashley's facade was beginning to crack under the pressure of managing relationships and responsibilities she wasn't qualified to handle. Clients were expressing dissatisfaction, vendors were confused, and the gap between her reported successes and actual performance was becoming too wide to hide indefinitely. But what she didn't know was that I'd been building a comprehensive understanding of her failures while maintaining the relationships and opportunities that represented real value to Cascade Creative. The Trailblazers project alone would demonstrate that my network and expertise couldn't be replaced by someone with fabricated credentials and superficial understanding of our market. The first warning signs were multiplying into a pattern that would soon become impossible for Michael to ignore. Ashley had been playing a dangerous game, trying to replace someone whose value was deeply embedded in relationships and expertise that took years to develop. She was about to learn that undermining someone's career while they're on maternity leave doesn't make you indispensable. It just makes you vulnerable when the truth inevitably emerges. The cascade of problems began on a Thursday morning that started like any other but would end with me, understanding just how much damage Ashley had already done to relationships that had taken me years to build. I was feeding Sophia her morning bottle when my phone started ringing with back-to-back calls from clients who had never contacted me directly during my maternity leave before. The first call came from Marcus Rodriguez, the owner of Verde Collective, a sustainable fashion boutique that had become one of our most successful local partnerships over the past 18 months. Marcus was normally laid back and easy to work with, but his voice carried an edge of frustration I'd never heard before. "Emma, I'm sorry to bother you while you're on leave, but I need to understand what's happening with our spring campaign. Yesterday I had a meeting with Ashley Chen, who told me that Cascade is recommending we completely pivot our marketing strategy. She wants us to abandon our focus on sustainability messaging and instead emphasize accessible luxury and mainstream fashion appeal." I nearly dropped Sophia's bottle. The sustainability angle wasn't just part of Verde's marketing strategy. It was the core of their entire business model and the reason their customers chose them over conventional retailers. "Marcus, can you tell me exactly what she proposed?" She said our environmental messaging was limiting our market reach, and that we could expand our customer base significantly by positioning ourselves as a regular fashion retailer that happened to use sustainable materials rather than a sustainable brand that happened to sell fashion. When I explained that our customers specifically seek us out because of our environmental values, she said I was underestimating consumer flexibility and that people would be more responsive to aspirational lifestyle messaging.
I closed my eyes, feeling physically sick. Ashley was proposing to destroy everything that made Verde unique in the Portland market. Their loyal customer base had been built specifically around shared values and environmental consciousness. Removing that focus would alienate their existing customers without necessarily attracting new ones who had different shopping priorities. She also said that our current campaign metrics showed limited growth potential, and that Cascade was recommending a complete rebranding that would involve new photography, revised website content, and a social media strategy focused on fashion trends rather than sustainability practices. "Emma, the numbers she was citing didn't match anything I've seen from our actual performance data. This was even worse than I'd feared. Ashley wasn't just misunderstanding Verde's brand identity, she was apparently manipulating data to support recommendations that made no strategic sense. Marcus, I want you to know that no final decisions have been made about your campaign strategy. Can you send me the presentation materials Ashley shared with you? I'd like to review them and schedule a follow-up conversation next week." "Thank you, Emma." Honestly, we were starting to wonder if Cascade still understood our business. We've been so happy with the relationship we've built over the past year and a half, and this sudden shift felt completely disconnected from everything we've accomplished together. Before I could fully process the Verde situation, my phone rang again. This time it was Dr. Patricia Kim, the marketing director for a local medical practice that specialized in women's health. Patricia and I had developed a particularly strong working relationship because she appreciated my understanding of how to market healthcare services without being pushy or insensitive. "Emma, I hope you don't mind me calling you directly, but I need advice about a situation with your colleague Ashley. She contacted us about optimizing our patient acquisition strategy and suggested we implement what she called aggressive growth tactics that frankly made our entire staff uncomfortable." "What kind of tactic?" "She wants us to start purchasing patient lists from data brokers and implementing targeted advertising to women who have recently searched for reproductive health information online." When we explained that our practice has always grown through referrals and community relationships, because healthcare marketing needs to be based on trust rather than advertising pressure, she said we were leaving money on the table and failing to leverage available technology. I felt anger rising in my chest. Healthcare marketing, especially for women's health services, required extraordinary sensitivity and ethical consideration. The idea of purchasing patient data and targeting vulnerable women with health concerns showed a complete lack of understanding about both the medical industry and basic ethical marketing practices. "Patricia, you were absolutely right to be uncomfortable with those suggestions. That approach would not only be inappropriate for your practice, it could potentially create legal and ethical issues that could damage your reputation in the medical community." "That's exactly what we were thinking, but Ashley insisted that these were industry standard practices, and that our concerns were outdated thinking that limits practice growth. She made us feel like we were being naive about modern healthcare marketing, but everything she proposed felt wrong for our values and our patient relationships. After hanging up with Patricia, I sat in stunned silence while Sophia finished her bottle. In the span of 30 minutes, I'd learned that Ashley was systematically proposing inappropriate strategies to at least 2 clients, manipulating data to support her recommendations, and dismissing client concerns as ignorance rather than legitimate business insight. But the calls weren't finished. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again with a call from James Portland, the operations manager for Pacific Coast Roasters, a local coffee company that had been one of our most successful partnerships. James's voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear underlying tension. "Emma, I'm calling because we had an unusual experience with your temporary replacement, and we wanted to get your perspective on whether this represents a new direction for Cascade's approach to client relationships." "What happened, James?" Ashley Chen scheduled what she called a strategic review meeting, where she presented an analysis of our current marketing effectiveness. According to her assessment, our focus on local sourcing and community partnerships has been constraining our scalability and preventing us from accessing larger market segments. She recommended that we consider expanding to a regional distribution model and adjusting our messaging to appeal to a broader demographic. This was the same pattern I'd heard from Marcus and Patricia. Ashley was systematically telling successful local businesses that their core values and market positioning were mistakes that needed to be corrected through generic growth strategy. "James, how did your team respond to these recommendations?" "Well, that's the thing. Our local sourcing and community focus aren't just marketing messages, they're the foundation of our entire business model. We built Pacific Coast Roasters specifically to support local farmers and create authentic community connection. The broader demographic she wants us to target includes people who prioritize convenience and price over quality and sustainability, which would require us to completely change our product sourcing and pricing structure." "Did she provide any data to support her assessment of your current marketing effectiveness?" "She showed us charts and graphs that supposedly demonstrated limited reach and missed opportunities, but when we asked for the source data behind her analysis, she said it was based on industry benchmarks and comparable market studies that she couldn't share due to competitive sensitivity." "Emma, we've been tracking our own marketing metrics carefully, and our customer retention and referral rates have been consistently strong. Her analysis didn't align with any of the data we've been collecting." After James finished describing his meeting with Ashley, I realized I was dealing with something far more serious than individual client dissatisfaction. Ashley was conducting unauthorized strategic reviews, presenting questionable data analysis, and systematically recommending that successful local businesses abandon the core values that had made them profitable in the Portland market. She was essentially trying to turn every Cascade client into a generic business that could be marketed using cookie-cutter strategies. The phone calls continued throughout the morning. Lisa Chen from Artisan Ales, a craft brewery that had become popular specifically because of their neighborhood focus and community involvement, had been told that their small-scale thinking was preventing them from accessing the craft beer market's growth potential. Ashley had recommended they consider distribution partnerships that would require them to increase production volume and standardize their brewing processes in ways that would eliminate the experimental small-batch approach that their customers value. Roberto Silva from Cascadia Outdoor Gear, an equipment retailer that had built their reputation on expert advice and personalized service, had been presented with a plan to streamline customer interactions through online chat systems and product recommendation algorithms. Ashley had suggested that their current approach of having knowledgeable staff spend significant time helping customers choose appropriate gear was inefficient and inconsistent with modern retail expectations. By noon, I had received calls from 6 different clients, all describing similar experiences with Ashley's strategic recommendation. The pattern was unmistakable. She was applying generic business growth formulas without understanding the specific market dynamics, customer relationships, and value propositions that had made each business successful in Portland's unique commercial environment. But what made the situation even more alarming was learning that Ashley had scheduled these strategic review meetings without consulting anyone else at Cascade and without getting approval from Michael for the recommendation she was making. She was essentially freelancing as a business consultant while representing herself as speaking for the agency's official position. That afternoon, I called Janet to get her perspective on what was happening internally while these client disasters were unfolding. Janet, I've been hearing from several clients about meetings Ashley has been having with them. Are you aware of the strategic recommendation she's been making? Emma, I'm so glad you called. We've been getting confused and concerned feedback from multiple clients, but Ashley keeps telling Michael that everything is going smoothly and that clients are excited about fresh perspectives on their campaign. She's been presenting these meetings as routine check-ins rather than major strategic consultations. Has Michael been reviewing the recommendations she's making before she presents them to clients? That's the problem. She's been scheduling these meetings directly with clients without going through our normal review process. She tells Michael about them afterward, but only provides general summaries rather than detailed reports about what she actually proposed. When clients call with questions or concerns, she handles those conversations herself and doesn't involve the rest of the team. This explained why the client problems were multiplying without Michael being aware of the scope of the issue. Ashley had created a system where she was operating independently, managing client relationships without oversight, and controlling the flow of information back to leadership. Janet, what happens when clients express dissatisfaction with her recommendation? She's been telling them that resistance to change is normal and that successful businesses need to push through comfort zones to achieve growth. When clients insist they're happy with their current strategies, she suggests they're limiting their potential and not taking advantage of available opportunity. A few clients have asked to speak with Michael directly, but Ashley has been telling them that he's focused on big-picture strategy and has delegated client relationship management to her. I realized that Ashley had constructed an elaborate system to isolate herself from accountability while maintaining control over client communication. She was operating as if she had complete authority over strategic decision-making while preventing clients from accessing other members of the Cascade team who might question her approach. The most troubling part was understanding that these weren't just individual client relations problems. They represented a systematic threat to Cascade's entire reputation in the Portland business community. Local business networks are tightly connected, and word about inappropriate marketing recommendations would spread quickly through professional associations, networking groups, and informal business relationships. That evening, I spent several hours documenting every client conversation I'd had, creating detailed records of Ashley's recommendations and the client responses. The picture that emerged was of someone who fundamentally misunderstood the Portland market and was applying inappropriate strategies that could damage both individual businesses and Cascade's reputation as an agency that understood local business culture. But I also realized that this documentation represented powerful evidence that could be used to demonstrate the contrast between Ashley's approach and the relationship-based strategies that had made Cascade successful. Every client who had called me was essentially asking for my return and expressing preference for the collaborative, values-based approach I'd developed over 6 years of working in Portland's business community. The problems were multiplying faster than Ashley could manage them, and her attempts to control information flow were beginning to break down as clients became increasingly frustrated with recommendations that didn't align with their business models or values. The warning signs were becoming impossible to ignore, and I knew that Michael would have to confront the reality of what Ashley was doing to his agency's client relationship. The crisis reached its breaking point on a Friday afternoon when 3 separate incidents converged to create a situation that could no longer be hidden or managed through Ashley's careful information control. I was preparing Sophia for her afternoon nap when my phone exploded with calls and messages that would expose the full extent of the damage Ashley had caused. The first call came from Rachel Morrison at Powell's Books, and her voice carried a level of urgency I'd never heard from her before. "Emma, we have a serious problem that needs immediate attention." Ashley presented what she called our finalized spring campaign strategy to our executive team yesterday, and it's created a crisis that's threatening our relationship with Cascade entirely. My heart started racing. Rachel, what exactly did she present? She completely ignored everything we discussed about maintaining our community focus and instead proposed a campaign that positions Powell's as an urban lifestyle destination, targeting tourists and transplants rather than local residents. The visuals she showed looked like something you'd see for a trendy boutique hotel rather than a bookstore with 90 years of Portland history. I felt my stomach drop. Powell's wasn't just any client. They were an iconic Portland institution with deep community roots and a carefully cultivated brand identity that honored both their literary heritage and their role as a community gathering place. But Emma, that's not even the worst part. She recommended that we discontinue our community reading programs and local author events because they don't generate measurable ROI, and instead focus our programming budget on influencer partnerships and viral content creation. When our team explained that community programming is core to our mission and identity, she said we needed to prioritize revenue generation over sentimental attachments. I closed my eyes, feeling physically sick. Ashley was proposing to destroy everything that made Powell's special while demonstrating a complete misunderstanding of why the bookstore had remained successful while other independent stores struggled. Rachel, how did your executive team respond? There was complete silence in the room. Our CEO asked Ashley if she understood that Powell's success was built specifically on community relationships and local literary culture, and Ashley said that nostalgic business models were unsustainable in competitive markets and that we needed to evolve or risk obsolescence. Emma, she essentially told the leadership team of a 90-year-old Portland institution that they didn't understand their own business. The audacity of Ashley's approach was staggering, but I knew there had to be more to the story for Rachel to be calling me with such urgency. The meeting ended with our CEO asking for time to reconsider our partnership with Cascade, and requesting that all campaign development be suspended until we could evaluate whether our values remain aligned. Emma, they're talking about terminating our contract entirely. This was catastrophic. Powell's wasn't just a major client, they were a Portland cultural landmark whose endorsement carried enormous weight in the local business community. Losing them wouldn't just mean lost revenue, it would damage Cascade's reputation throughout the city's tight-knit professional networks. Rachel, I need you to know that Ashley's presentation did not represent Cascade's official position or recommendation. Those strategic changes were not approved through our normal review process, and they don't reflect our understanding of Powell's brand identity or business model. Emma, I was hoping you'd say that, but we need more than assurance. Our executive team wants to meet with Michael Thompson directly to discuss whether Cascade still understands and supports our mission, or if Ashley's approach represents a new direction for your agency. If we can't get clarity on this by Monday, they're prepared to start looking for a new marketing partner. After hanging up with Rachel, I sat in my quiet house trying to process the magnitude of what I'd just learned. Ashley had essentially delivered an ultimatum to one of Portland's most respected businesses, telling them to abandon their core identity or risk failure. The fact that Powell's leadership was considering ending their relationship with Cascade meant that word of this disaster would spread throughout Portland's business community within days. But before I could fully absorb the Powell's situation, my phone rang again with a call from Dr. Patricia Kim at the Women's Health Practice. Emma, I'm calling because we just received a follow-up proposal from Ashley that we find deeply concerning, and we need to understand if this represents Cascade's official position on healthcare marketing ethics. What kind of proposal, Patricia? After our initial meeting where we expressed discomfort with her patient data acquisition suggestions, Ashley sent us a detailed implementation plan for what she calls competitive patient recruitment strategy. The plan includes purchasing email lists from fertility clinics, targeting women who have visited pregnancy-related websites with specific medical advertising, and developing urgency-based messaging that emphasizes limited appointment availability to encourage immediate booking. I felt anger rising in my chest. These strategies weren't just inappropriate, they could potentially violate healthcare privacy regulations and professional ethical standards. Patricia,
Ashley's proposal does not represent Cascade's approach to healthcare marketing. Those strategies could create legal and ethical issues that would put your practice at serious risk. That's exactly what we thought, but when we contacted Ashley to express our concerns, she said we were being overly cautious about outdated privacy concerns, and that successful medical practices were already using these techniques. She implied that our hesitation was preventing us from growing our patient base effectively. Did she provide any documentation or evidence that these strategies are actually used by other healthcare practices? She sent us what she called industry case studies, but when we had our legal counsel review them, they were generic marketing examples that didn't specifically relate to healthcare and didn't address any of the regulatory requirements that govern medical practice advertising. Emma, it felt like she was trying to pressure us into implementing strategies without understanding the legal framework we operate within. This conversation revealed something even more alarming than Ashley's poor strategic judgment. She was apparently providing legal and regulatory advice in areas where she had no expertise, potentially exposing both clients and Cascade to serious liability issues. Patricia, I want to assure you that Cascade has always prioritized ethical marketing practices, especially in healthcare. No client should ever be pressured to implement strategies that conflict with their professional standards or regulatory requirements. We appreciate that, Emma, but we need to understand what's happening with your agency's approach to our account. We've been happy with our relationship with Cascade, but Ashley's recommendations are so far outside our comfort zone that we're starting to question whether we should continue the partnership. The third crisis call came just 20 minutes later, and this one would prove to be the most damaging of all. Michael Thompson himself was calling me directly, and his voice carried a level of stress and confusion I'd never heard from him before. Emma, I'm sorry to bother you during your maternity leave, but I need to understand what's been happening with some of our client relationships. I just spent the morning dealing with 3 separate client complaints about communications they've received from Ashley, and I'm trying to piece together what actually happened. Michael, what kind of complaint? Verde Collective is threatening to terminate their contract because Ashley apparently told them their sustainability focus was limiting their market potential, and recommended they abandon environmental messaging in favor of mainstream fashion position. Pacific Coast Roasters is upset because Ashley suggested they compromise their local sourcing model to access broader distribution opportunities, and Powell's. He paused, and I could hear him taking a deep breath. Powell's is considering ending our partnership entirely because Ashley told their executive team that community programming doesn't generate measurable. Michael's voice carried a note of disbelief, as if he couldn't quite process what he was telling me. Emma, these complaints don't make sense. Ashley has been giving me positive reports about all her client interaction. She said Verde was excited about growth opportunities, Pacific Coast was open to strategic expansion, and Powell's was enthusiastic about evolving their approach. How could there be such a disconnect between what she's been telling me and what clients are actually saying? I realized this was the moment when Ashley's system of information control had finally collapsed. She could no longer manage the flow of feedback to Michael when multiple major clients were bypassing her entirely and expressing their concerns directly to leadership. Michael, I think there may have been some miscommunication about the scope of Ashley's authority and the types of recommendations she's been making to clients. That's putting it mildly. Emma, I never authorized her to propose fundamental changes to client business model. Her role was supposed to be maintaining relationships and providing tactical support while you were on leave, not conducting strategic overhauls of successful campaigns. Has Ashley been getting approval for her client recommendations before presenting? There was a long pause that told me everything I needed to know. She told me she was conducting routine strategy discussions, and that clients were responding positively to fresh perspective. I trusted her to handle day-to-day client communications without requiring detailed approval for every interaction. But Emma, some of the recommendations these clients are describing sound completely inappropriate for their businesses. Michael's voice was getting more agitated as he processed the implications of what he was learning. Verde Collective built their entire brand around sustainability. Pacific Coast Roasters' local sourcing model is what differentiates them from every other coffee company in Portland. And Powell's books, Emma, suggesting that Powell's abandoned community programming is like telling them to stop being Powells. What was Ashley thinking? I could hear Michael pacing in his office, trying to understand how his trusted new hire had created such extensive damage in such a short period of time. Michael, I think you need to know that I've been receiving calls from several other clients with similar concerns about Ashley's strategic recommendation. The pattern seems to be that she's applying generic growth strategies without understanding the specific value propositions that make each business successful in the Portland market. How many other clients? At least 6 that have contacted me directly, and probably more who haven't reached out yet. The common thread is that Ashley is recommending changes that would require clients to abandon the core values and market positioning that brought them to Cascade in the first place. There was another long pause as Michael absorbed this information. Emma, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. How confident are you in Ashley's qualifications and experience? When I hired her, she presented impressive credentials and seemed to understand our approach to client relationships, but the strategic judgment she's been demonstrating doesn't match the expertise I thought she had. This was the opening I'd been waiting for, the moment when I could share what I'd discovered about Ashley's fabricated background without seeming like I was attacking her personally. Michael, I think you should have someone verify Ashley's employment history and credentials. Some of the companies she listed on her resume may not have records of her employment during the timeframes she specified. Are you suggesting she lied about her background? I'm suggesting that it would be worth confirming her experience before making any decisions about her permanent role or continued authority over client relations. Michael was quiet for a long moment, and I could almost hear him connecting dots and reconsidering everything he thought he knew about Ashley's capabilities. Emma, I need you to come in next week. I know you're not scheduled to return until the following Monday, but we have a crisis that requires immediate attention, and it's clear that I need your perspective on how to rebuild these client relationships. Of course, Michael, I can come in Tuesday morning. Actually, can you come in Monday? Emma, if Powell's decides to terminate their contract and word spreads about why they left, it could seriously damage our reputation throughout the Portland business community. We need to address this situation before it gets any worse. After hanging up with Michael, I sat in my living room, holding Sophia and trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. In the span of 2 hours, I'd learned that Ashley's incompetence had created a full-scale crisis that threatened multiple client relationships and potentially Cascade's entire reputation in the local market. But I also realized that this crisis represented an opportunity to demonstrate my value in a way that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. The contrast between Ashley's destructive approach and my understanding of client needs was now impossible to overlook. Michael was actively asking for my help to repair relationships that Ashley had damaged, which meant I would be returning to work not as someone whose role needed to be restructured, but as someone whose expertise was essential for the agency's survival. The full crisis had emerged and Ashley's facade had finally collapsed under the weight of her own incompetence, but now came the real test, whether I could rebuild the trust and relationships that had been damaged while ensuring that something like this could never happen again. Monday morning arrived with a sense of inevitability that felt both empowering and nerve-wracking. I was returning to Cascade Creative Solutions, not as a woman desperate to reclaim her position, but as the professional Michael had called upon to salvage client relationships that Ashley had systematically damaged. Sophia was staying with my mother for the day, and as I walked through the familiar Pearl District streets toward the office, I felt a combination of anger, determination, and strategic clarity that had been building throughout my extended leave. The office felt different when I stepped through the main entrance. The energy that had always characterized Cascade's creative environment seemed muted, and several colleagues who noticed my arrival offered smiles that carried undertones of relief rather than simple welcome. Janet met me at the elevator, and her expression immediately told me that the weekend had brought additional developments I needed to know about. Emma, thank God you're here early. We've had 2 more client situations since Friday that Michael needs to brief you on before the emergency meeting starts. What kind of situations? Deschutes Brewery called this morning to say they're suspending all campaign development until they can meet with you direct. And Verde Collective sent an email Saturday requesting immediate clarification about Cascade's strategic direction before they make final decisions about their contract renewal. As we rode the elevator to the fourth floor, Janet filled me in on the weekend's internal developments that had created an atmosphere of crisis throughout the agency. Michael spent Saturday morning calling the references on Ashley's resume, and 3 of the 4 companies had no record of her employment.
The fourth confirmed she'd worked there, but only for 3 months as a junior coordinator, not the 2 years in a senior position that her resume claimed. I felt a grim satisfaction at this confirmation of what I'd suspected for weeks, but Janet's next update was even more significant. When Michael confronted Ashley about the discrepancies in her background, she initially tried to explain them as formatting errors and misunderstandings about job titles. But when he pressed for details, she finally admitted that she'd enhanced her experience to demonstrate her potential rather than just her past accomplishments. How did Michael respond to that? He told her that misrepresenting qualifications was grounds for immediate termination, but that he needed to understand the full scope of client issues before making final decisions about her employment. She's been suspended from all client contact while Michael evaluates the situation. As we reached our floor, Janet hesitated before continuing. Emma, there's something else you need to know. Ashley asked Michael if she could speak with you directly when you arrived today. She said she wanted to clear the air and explain the misunderstandings that had led to client complaints. Michael told her that any communication with you would need to happen in his presence and only if you agreed to it. I considered this request as we walked toward Michael's office. Part of me was curious to hear how Ashley would attempt to justify her behavior, but I also recognized that engaging with her directly could complicate the professional dynamics I needed to navigate carefully. Michael's office door was open, and he looked up immediately when Janet and I approached. His expression carried the weight of someone who had spent the weekend confronting the reality that his judgment about a key hire had been catastrophically wrong. Emma, thank you for coming in. I need to bring you up to speed on the full scope of what we're dealing with, and then I need your help developing a plan to rebuild client confidence before we lose any more accounts. I settled into the chair across from his desk, the same chair where I'd sat for countless strategy sessions over the past 6 years. But this conversation felt fundamentally different. Michael wasn't speaking to me as a subordinate returning from leave. He was speaking to me as a partner whose expertise he needed to save his business. Emma, I owe you an apology. I hired Ashley without properly verifying her credentials, and I gave her authority over client relationships without adequately supervising her work. The result has been a disaster that threatens some of our most important partnerships and potentially our reputation throughout Portland's business community. Michael's acknowledgement of his mistakes was both surprising and strategic. He was taking responsibility for the crisis while positioning our conversation as a collaborative effort to solve problems rather than a defensive explanation of his decision-making. I spent yesterday reviewing every client interaction Ashley has had since she started, and the pattern that emerged is deeply troubling. She systematically recommended that successful local businesses abandon the core values and market positioning that brought them to Cascade in the first place. It's as if she completely misunderstood what makes our agency successful in Portland's business environment. Michael, I think Ashley was applying generic business growth strategies without understanding the specific cultural dynamics and relationship-based approach that differentiates Cascade from larger agencies. And that fundamental misunderstanding has created client relations problems that go far beyond individual campaign disagreements. Emma, some of these businesses are questioning whether Cascade still shares their values and understands their market position. Michael pulled out a folder that contained what appeared to be detailed notes from his weekend conversations with affected clients. I spoke directly with the leadership teams at Powell's, Verde Collective, and Pacific Coast Roaster. All 3 expressed the same basic concern. They chose Cascade because we understood that successful business in Portland requires authentic community connections and values-based marketing. Ashley's recommendations suggested that we'd abandon that approach in favor of generic growth tactics that could damage their brand identity. I listened carefully as Michael described conversations that revealed the depth of client dissatisfaction and the urgent need for relationship repair. Emma, Powell's CEO was particularly direct. He said they'd built their partnership with Cascade on trust that we understood their mission and respected their community role. Ashley's suggestion that they discontinue programming that's core to their identity made them question whether Cascade had changed direction entirely. What did you tell them? I told them that Ashley's recommendations did not represent Cascade's position and that her authority over strategic decisions had been immediately suspended. But Emma, they want to meet with you specifically before making any decisions about continuing the partnership. They said you understand their business in ways that can't be quickly replicated by someone new. This feedback confirmed what I'd suspected about the deep relationship-based foundations of Cascade's success. Clients weren't just purchasing marketing services, they were investing in partnerships with professionals who understood their values and market positioning. Michael, what's the timeline for these client meetings? That's the urgent part. Powell's wants to meet tomorrow afternoon, Verde Collective on Wednesday, and Pacific Coast Roasters on Thursday. Deschutes Brewery is willing to wait until Friday, but they've made it clear that their patience is limited. I realized that the next 4 days would essentially determine whether Cascade could recover from Ashley's damage, or would lose multiple major clients whose departures could create a domino effect throughout Portland's business community. Emma, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know that your answer will determine how I structure your return and your role going forward. Are you willing to take primary responsibility for rebuilding these client relationships, not just maintaining them, but actively repairing trust that's been damaged and demonstrating that Cascade still understands and supports their business model? This was the moment I'd been preparing for throughout my maternity leave, the opportunity to demonstrate value that couldn't be replaced or replicated by someone with fabricated credentials and superficial understanding. Michael, I'm willing to take on that responsibility, but I need authority that matches the scope of the challenge. If I'm going to rebuild client trust, I need to be able to make commitments about how Cascade will handle these relationships going forward. What specific authority are you requesting? I want final approval over all strategic recommendations for these accounts, direct access to you for any issues that arise, and assurance that no other team members will be making strategic proposals to these clients without my review and approval. Michael nodded immediately. Done. Emma, at this point I need you to succeed more than you need this job. If we lose these accounts, the damage to our reputation could affect our ability to attract new clients and retain existing ones. I also want to implement a formal client relationship management system that ensures this kind of miscommunication and unauthorized strategic consulting can never happen again. Whatever you think is necessary. Emma, you have complete authority to structure client management in ways that protect both our relationships and our reputation. This conversation was establishing not just my return to work, but my evolution into a leadership role with significantly more authority than I'd held before my leave. Michael was essentially acknowledging that my expertise and client relationships were essential to Cascade's survival. There's one more thing, Michael. I want to be completely transparent with you about something I learned during my leave that's relevant to Ashley's hiring and performance. I paused, choosing my words carefully. Ashley Chen is having a personal relationship with my husband David. I believe she may have used information about my work methods and client relationships that she obtained through that relationship to position herself as my replacement. Michael's expression shifted from surprise to anger as he processed the implications of what I was telling him. Emma, are you saying that Ashley had inside information about your client management approach and used it to convince me she was qualified for this position? I'm saying that the level of detail she demonstrated about Cascade's operations and my specific client relationships during her hiring process may have come from sources other than her professional experience. That would explain how she seemed so knowledgeable about our company culture and client needs during her interviews, despite having fabricated most of her relevant work history. Michael was quiet for a moment, clearly connecting dots and reconsidering everything he thought he knew about Ashley's qualifications and motivations. Emma, this information changes my perspective on Ashley's deception entirely. This wasn't just resume embellishment. This was a coordinated effort to obtain a position she wasn't qualified for by using confidential information about our business operation. Michael, I'm telling you this because I want you to understand the full context of what happened, but I don't want my personal situation to complicate the professional decisions you need to make about client relationships and agency operations. I appreciate your transparency, and I want you to know that this information will remain confidential. But Emma, it does help me understand how someone with Ashley's actual qualifications managed to convince me she had expertise she clearly didn't possess. Our conversation was interrupted by a knock on Michael's office door. Janet appeared with a message that would add another layer of complexity to an already challenging situation. Michael, Ashley is here and asking to speak with both you and Emma together. She says she has information that could help resolve the client issues and wants to set the record straight about what happened with her strategic recommendations. Michael looked at me with a question in his eyes, leaving the decision about whether to engage with Ashley up to me. I considered the request carefully. Part of me was curious to hear how Ashley would attempt to justify her behavior and explain her strategic decision. But I also recognized that any conversation with her could become complicated by the personal dynamics she'd created through her relationship with David. Michael, I'm willing to hear what Ashley has to say, but I want to be clear that this conversation is focused on professional issues related to client relationships and agency operations. I'm not interested in discussing personal matters. Understood. Janet, please tell Ashley we'll meet with her in 15 minutes in the conference room. And Janet, I want you to join us as a witness to whatever conversation takes place. As Janet left to relay the message, Michael turned back to me with a serious expression. The conference room felt charged with tension when Ashley walked in 15 minutes later. She carried herself with the same confident posture I remembered from our first encounter, but something had shifted in her demeanor. Her usual polished composure seemed forced, and I could see the strain of maintaining her facade under pressure that was finally becoming too intense to manage. Michael gestured for everyone to sit at the large table that had hosted countless successful strategy sessions over the years. Janet took a seat near the window with a notepad, clearly prepared to document whatever transpired. Ashley chose a chair directly across from me, maintaining eye contact with what seemed like deliberate defiance. Ashley, Michael began, you requested this meeting to provide information that could help resolve our client issues. Before we proceed, I want to be clear that we're here to discuss professional matters related to your work performance and client relationship. Ashley straightened in her chair and launched into what sounded like a prepared speech. I appreciate the opportunity to clarify some misunderstandings that have developed around my client interaction. I believe the negative feedback you've received stems from resistance to change rather than problems with my strategic recommendation. Many of these businesses have been operating with outdated approaches that limit their growth potential, and my role has been to help them see opportunities they might not have considered. I felt my jaw clench as Ashley continued with the same condescending dismissal of client concerns that had created the crisis in the first place. For example, Verde Collective's focus on sustainability messaging has created a niche market position that prevents them from accessing broader consumer segments. My recommendation to emphasize lifestyle and fashion elements alongside environmental messaging would expand their appeal without abandoning their core values entirely. Michael's expression remained neutral, but I could see him processing Ashley's continued failure to understand why her recommendations had been inappropriate. Powell's Books has built their identity around community programming that generates goodwill but doesn't contribute significantly to revenue growth. My suggestion to balance community focus with revenue-generating initiatives like influencer partnerships and viral content would strengthen their financial position while maintaining their cultural role. Ashley's explanations revealed the fundamental disconnect between her approach and the relationship-based philosophy that had made Cascade successful. She was viewing every client through a lens of generic optimization rather than understanding their unique value propositions and market positions. Ashley, I said carefully, can you explain how you developed these strategic recommendations? What research or analysis did you conduct to determine that these businesses needed to change their successful approaches? For the first time since entering the room, Ashley seemed less certain of her footing. I applied established marketing principles and industry best practices to identify growth opportunities that aligned with current market trends. The strategies I recommended have been successful for similar businesses in competitive markets. Which similar businesses, Michael asked? Can you provide specific examples of companies that achieved success by abandoning their core value propositions in favor of broader market appeal? Ashley's pause lasted longer than it should have, and I realized she was struggling to provide concrete examples to support her theoretical approach. The marketing industry has extensive case studies demonstrating the effectiveness of market expansion strategies for businesses that have been limiting themselves to niche position. Ashley, I said, Verde Collective's niche positioning around sustainability has allowed them to charge premium prices and maintain customer loyalty that most fashion retailers can't achieve. Powell's community programming generates customer retention rates that are significantly higher than industry averages. What specific metrics did you use to determine these successful strategies were problems that needed to be solved? Ashley's confident demeanor began to crack as she realized she couldn't provide data-driven justification for recommendations that had been based on generic assumptions rather than client-specific analysis. Sometimes businesses become so focused on maintaining existing approaches that they resist exploring opportunities for improvement. My role was to challenge comfortable thinking and present alternatives that could drive growth. Michael leaned forward slightly. Ashley, challenging comfortable thinking requires understanding why current approaches are working before proposing alternatives. Can you tell me what research you conducted into our clients' market positions, customer demographics, and competitive landscapes before recommending strategic changes? The silence that followed this question revealed everything. Ashley had been making strategic recommendations without conducting the foundational research that any legitimate marketing consultation would require. I reviewed available information about their current campaigns and identified areas where industry best practices could be applied to improve results. What available information? Janet asked quietly. Did you review their performance metrics, customer feedback data, or competitive analysis report? Ashley's inability to answer specific questions about her research methodology was making it clear that her strategic recommendations had been based on assumptions and generic formulas rather than client-specific analysis. Michael's expression had shifted from neutral inquiry to obvious disappointment. Ashley, effective marketing strategy requires deep understanding of client businesses, their customers, and their competitive environment. The recommendations you made suggest that you didn't conduct the research necessary to understand why these businesses chose their current approaches or how those approaches contribute to their success. I was working to provide fresh perspectives that could help these businesses expand beyond their current limitations. Their current limitations? I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. Ashley, Verde Collective has grown their revenue by 40% over the past 18 months. Specifically because of their sustainability focus. Powell's Books has maintained profitability while most independent bookstores have struggled, specifically because of their community program. These aren't limitations, these are competitive advantages. Ashley's face flushed as she realized her fundamental misunderstanding of the client's situations was being exposed in detail. Sometimes successful businesses need outside perspective to see opportunities they might be missing because they're too close to their own operations. Michael stood up from the table and his tone indicated that the conversation was approaching its conclusion. Ashley, outside perspective is valuable when it's based on expertise and thorough understanding of the business context. What you provided was generic advice that demonstrated lack of understanding about our clients' market positions and the reasons for their success. He paused, looking directly at Ashley with an expression that conveyed both disappointment and finality. More concerning is the discovery that you misrepresented your qualifications and experience when you interviewed for this position. The combination of fabricated credentials and poor strategic judgment has created a crisis that threatens our relationships with multiple major clients. Ashley's composure finally cracked entirely. Michael, I may have enhanced my resume, but my strategic thinking and marketing knowledge are solid. The problems we're experiencing are due to client resistance to change, not flaws in my recommendation. The fact that Ashley was still blaming clients for rejecting inappropriate advice showed that she remained fundamentally unable to understand the scope of her mistakes. Ashley,
Michael said with finality, your employment with Cascade Creative Solutions is terminated effective immediately. You'll receive information about final pay and benefits from our HR department, but your access to company systems and client information is revoked as of this moment. Ashley's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, and finally a kind of desperate calculation. Michael, I think you should know that my relationship with Emma's husband may have influenced her perspective on my work here. She has personal motivations for wanting me removed from the company that don't reflect objective assessment of my professional performance. The room went completely silent. Ashley had just admitted to the relationship with David while trying to use it as a weapon against my credibility. The manipulation was so transparent and desperate that it actually strengthened my position rather than undermining it. Michael's expression turned cold. Ashley, your personal relationships are irrelevant to the professional issues we've discussed today. Your termination is based on documented client complaint, misrepresented qualifications, and strategic recommendations that threatened important business relationships. Personal conflicts don't change the fact that you nearly lost us several major accounts through inappropriate consulting advice. Janet looked up from her notepad with an expression that conveyed both shock at Ashley's final gambit and satisfaction that it had backfired so completely. Furthermore, Michael continued, the fact that you used information obtained through personal relationships to misrepresent your understanding of our business operations makes your deception even more serious. Professional conduct requires maintaining appropriate boundaries between personal and business relationships. Ashley gathered her things with shaking hands, her final attempt at manipulation having exposed the depths of her unprofessional behavior rather than providing the leverage she'd hoped for. I'll expect all company materials returned by end of business today, and any confidential information about our clients or operations is not to be shared or used in future employment. After Ashley left the conference room, the three of us sat in silence for a moment, processing what had just transpired. Emma, Michael said finally, I owe you an enormous apology. I hired someone with fabricated credentials who nearly destroyed relationships you spent years building, and then I gave her authority to make strategic decisions without proper oversight. The crisis we're facing is entirely due to my poor judgment. Michael, the important thing now is rebuilding client trust and ensuring this kind of situation never happens again. Agreed. Emma, I want to offer you a permanent promotion to Director of Client Relations with full authority over strategic consulting, account management, and the client relationship protocols you mentioned earlier. The offer was both gratifying and appropriate given what had transpired, but I wanted to ensure the role included the systemic changes necessary to prevent future problems. Michael, I accept that offer, but I want to implement comprehensive changes to how we handle client communications, strategic consulting, and new employee integration. We need systems that ensure every client interaction reflects Cascade's values and expertise. Whatever changes you think are necessary, Emma, at this point I trust your judgment about client relations more than I trust my own. The next 4 days became a whirlwind of intensive client meetings that would determine whether Cascade could recover from Ashley's damage. Each meeting required careful preparation, genuine acknowledgement of the problems that had occurred, and detailed discussion of how we would prevent similar issues in the future. The Powell's meeting on Tuesday afternoon was the most crucial, given their status in the Portland business community and the severity of the strategic disconnect Ashley had created. Rachel Morrison and 2 other executive team members listened carefully as I explained the circumstances that had led to Ashley's inappropriate recommendations, and outlined the specific changes Cascade was implementing to ensure better oversight and communication. Emma, the CEO said after I'd finished my presentation, we appreciate your transparency about what happened, and we're satisfied that Ashley's approach didn't represent Cascade's actual values or strategic philosophy. However, we need assurance that the relationship-based approach we value will be protected going forward. That's exactly why I've asked for this meeting. I want to propose a formal partnership agreement that includes regular strategy reviews, documented communication protocols, and guaranteed access to senior leadership for any concerns about campaign direction or strategic recommendations. The Powell's team spent an hour discussing their specific needs and concerns, and by the end of the meeting, we developed a framework for collaboration that was actually stronger than our previous informal relationship. The Verde Collective meeting on Wednesday produced similar results, with Sarah Mitchell expressing relief that Cascade understood the importance of maintaining their sustainability focus, while exploring growth opportunities that aligned with their values, rather than contradicted them. Emma, what happened with Ashley made us realize how much we value the partnership we've built with you personally. We're willing to continue with Cascade, but we want assurance that our account will be managed by someone who understands our business model and respects our market position. Sarah, I can guarantee that any strategic recommendations will be developed collaboratively with your team and will be designed to strengthen your unique position rather than dilute it. By Friday afternoon, all 4 major clients had agreed to continue their partnerships with Cascade under the new client management protocols I'd developed. More importantly, several had expressed enthusiasm about expanding their campaigns based on our deeper understanding of their needs and market position. The Trailblazers opportunity that I'd discovered during my leave provided the perfect demonstration of value that Ashley could never have replicated. David Kim was thrilled to learn that I was returning with enhanced authority over strategic development, and our preliminary discussions about the community partnership campaign generated excitement throughout the Portland business community. 6 months later, Cascade Creative Solutions had not only recovered from the crisis Ashley created, but had grown significantly stronger. The formal client relationship protocols I'd implemented had improved communication and strategic alignment across all accounts. We'd landed 3 major new clients who specifically requested our relationship-based approach after hearing about our recovery from the Ashley situation. My role as Director of Client Relations had evolved into genuine partnership with Michael in the strategic direction of the agent. The Trailblazers campaign had been featured in national marketing publications as an example of authentic community engagement, bringing recognition that expanded our client base beyond Portland for the first time. But perhaps most importantly, the entire experience had demonstrated something I'd always known but never fully articulated. Successful marketing isn't about applying generic strategies or impressing clients with corporate buzzwords. It's about understanding businesses deeply enough to strengthen what makes them unique, rather than pressuring them to become something they're not. David and I had divorced quietly during the months following my return to work. The discovery of his affair and his role in providing Ashley with inside information about my professional life had made it clear that our marriage couldn't survive the level of betrayal and deception he'd engaged in. Sophia and I had moved to a small house in the Alberta neighborhood, where we'd built a peaceful life that balanced my demanding but fulfilling career with the joys of single motherhood. Ashley had found employment at a large marketing firm in Seattle, where her generic approach and corporate positioning were apparently better suited to their client base and business model. I occasionally heard updates about her work through industry contacts, but our paths never crossed professionally, and I had no interest in maintaining any connection to that chapter of my life. The experience had taught me lessons about professional resilience and personal strength that I carried forward in every aspect of my life. When someone tries to replace you, the best response isn't anger or revenge. It's demonstrating excellence that can't be replicated by someone who doesn't understand the depth and complexity of what you actually do. Sophia grew into a bright, curious toddler who loved visiting the Cascade office, where she'd become an unofficial mascot among my colleagues. She had no memory of the crisis that had defined her early months, but she was growing up with a mother who had learned to value her own expertise and never again allow anyone to underestimate her professional work.
The Powell's campaign we developed that fall became one of our most successful projects ever, demonstrating the power of marketing that genuinely understood and celebrated what made a business special. Verde Collective's sustainability-focused expansion attracted national attention and became a case study for authentic environmental marketing. Pacific Coast Roasters' community-based growth strategy helped them open 3 new locations while maintaining their local sourcing and neighborhood identity. Every success reminded me of the contrast between Ashley's generic optimization approach and the relationship-based philosophy that had made Cascade successful in Portland's unique business environment. She had tried to replace something she didn't understand with strategies that would have destroyed everything valuable about the businesses she was supposed to help. But more than professional vindication, the entire experience had given me confidence in my own judgment and expertise that I'd never fully possessed before. I'd learned to trust my understanding of client needs, market dynamics, and strategic development in ways that made me a more effective leader and consultant. The crisis Ashley created had temporarily threatened important business relationships, but ultimately it had strengthened both my position at Cascade and my reputation throughout Portland's business community. Clients knew they could trust me to understand their values and develop strategies that enhanced rather than compromised their market positioning. 2 years later, when Michael began discussing succession planning and the possibility of my eventually taking over leadership of Cascade Creative Solutions, I realized that Ashley's attempt to replace me had inadvertently accelerated my career in ways I never could have anticipated. Her deception and incompetence had created opportunities for me to demonstrate leadership and strategic thinking that might have taken years to develop through normal career progression. The woman who had walked into my workplace thinking she could steal my job while I was vulnerable and distracted by new motherhood had actually given me the catalyst I needed to claim authority and recognition that reflected my true capability. She'd underestimated not just my professional expertise, but my capacity for strategic thinking and resilience under pressure. In the end, the story wasn't about revenge or justice. It was about the difference between authentic expertise and superficial competence, between understanding businesses deeply and applying generic solutions, between building lasting relationships and pursuing short-term advantages through deception. Ashley had gambled that she could fake her way into a career she wasn't qualified for by using inside information and manipulating professional relationships. But sustainable success in any field requires genuine understanding, authentic relationships, and the kind of expertise that can only be developed through years of dedicated work and learning. Sophia and I had built a good life in Portland, surrounded by the business community where I'd established my reputation and the colleagues who had become genuine friends. Every successful campaign, every satisfied client, and every professional milestone reminded me that the attempt to replace me had only made me stronger, more confident, and more clear about the value I brought to every relationship and project. The woman who had tried to take my place while I was on maternity leave had taught me the most valuable lesson of my career. Never let anyone else define your worth, and never underestimate your own ability to overcome challenges that seem insurmountable in the moment. Sometimes the biggest threats to your career become the catalysts for the biggest breakthroughs in your professional development. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.